Hello everyone, welcome to my kitchen. My name is Michael and today I'm going to share with you how I can tomatoes. If you've got some tomato vines in the yard, just a few vines will produce a lot of tomatoes and you can definitely put those up and preserve those or you can use them in the future. So I'm going to start out here with my tomatoes. I've given these a little bit of a wash and we're going to continue on with the process. I'll set these to the side. So we're going to be doing a little bit of water bath canning today. And I've got my water bath canner here. If you're new to canning and water bath canning, then definitely stick around because this is going to be a lot of in-depth information that I'm going to give you here on this. And if you've canned in the past, maybe it might be a little bit refresher and something that you might see that you like a little bit better than what you do. And I always love to hear from you. If you've got a better technique than what I've got today, definitely leave me a comment in the comments section. I would love to hear from you. So let's get on with making our tomatoes. So I'm going to put this rack here on the side, and you definitely want a rack in your canner, whatever you've got. If you've got a big pot, you're going to put some type of a rack in the bottom of it, and that way the jars are not sitting flat on the bottom of the canner, because with it boiling, it could potentially, with it boiling on it, either turn it over or it could crack the glass, and you definitely don't want that. So with this little bit of a rack in here, it puts a little bit of buffer between the bottom of the canner and the jars. So we're going to start out with a jar lifter, and I've got one of these here that I really like. It's spring loaded. I do not recommend using a pair of tongs because these have this nice little rubber grip on them, and as you can see here, you can grab a hold of them and it's very secure. You definitely don't want this slipping while you've got really hot food in it, or definitely with this empty you could drop it and break it, and you definitely don't want to get cut with that. So if you've got a pair of tongs like these, there's a chance that that could slip, and you definitely don't want that. So I do not recommend using these. So these are relatively cheap. You can get, there are all kinds on the market. I like this one because it does have this little bit of a rubber gripper on the bottom of them. So definitely, if you've got these, use these for your canning. Yeah, but a little over 6 pounds of tomatoes that I've here. I'm just gonna make a small batch tonight. So I've got 6 jars here. In case I need some more, I've got some more in the dishwasher. You definitely want to make sure that your jars are clean. Whether you use soap and water and wash them in the sink or run them through the dishwasher like I did. I ran my lids through there also, so definitely want everything as clean as you can possibly get it. So I'm just gonna put my jars in my water bath canner here. I'm just gonna put a couple in, and then I'm going to show you what we're going to do. All right, now that I've got a couple of my jars and my canner, I'm just going to take some water here, rare tap water, and I'm going to start filling up the jars. And what that's going to do, we're eventually going to put enough water in this canner that it's going to be 1 to 2 inches above the top of our jars. And that's where we want to process our food also. So if you go ahead and put them in now, get the jars heated up, and that way you'll know, because your water level will be correct, how much water you're going to need for your water bath canner. So what we're doing here is I'm putting the water in the jars, and that just keeps the jars from floating around. So we'll fill all the jars up, and then whatever's left over with the water, it'll start spilling over in the side and start filling up the canner. So definitely do that little trick first. That way your jars aren't floating around in the water and they're stable and you won't have a chance of them breaking. So I'm going to continue to put the rest of these jars in my water bath canner. I'm going to fill it up to it's at least 2 inches above the top of the jars, and I'm going to put it on the stove and turn it on high. All right, now that I've got my water bath canner on the stove, I have all of my 7 jars now in there with them with water in it, and I've got about 2 inches above the top of the jars. So they are heating up. They do not have to boil because they're already clean. Looking at the USDA website, you don't have to boil and sterilize your jars if you're going to be processing them for more than 10 minutes. So definitely check out the USDA. Their information is constantly changing. So if you're watching this video way in the future, then definitely check to make sure that the information that I'm giving you today is still up to date. So as of this filming right now, you do not have to boil your jars. So we've got those coming up to about 180 degrees. We want those heated up. So I've got the lid on them and they are on the stove ready to go. So now we're moving on to our next step. We've got our tomatoes here. And like I said, I've got just a little over 6 pounds of those. And we're going to be blanching these today, or poaching them, whatever, however you want to call that, where we're going to take the skin off. This is the easiest way to do that. That way you don't have to peel all of these tomatoes. So I've got some water here coming up to a boil, and I'm going to let that continue to heat up. While I'm doing that, I want to talk about my lids. The lids that I've got here are brand new. You do not want to use or reuse your lids again. So definitely when you're getting ready to can, make sure that the lids that you're using are brand new. So I've got these in some water. I'm just going to put these on the stove. These do not have to be heated up to any temperature. I'm just going to raise them just a little bit above room temperature here, just to kind of get them warmed up a little bit, so when I get everything on the jars, they'll be ready to go. So these, we do not boil these. We just put these on the stove to kind of heat these up just a little bit. These are clean too. I did run them through the dishwasher. And then I've got my rings. Now the rings you can use again, as long as they're not rusted. You can definitely inspect them. You can take them off your jars and look at them just to make sure that they are good and in good condition, don't have any dents on them. So definitely you can use these again. These do not have to be heated up, but I'm going to go ahead and move the lids to the stove. All right, as this water continues to heat up here to a boil, we'll continue to talk about that. So I've got another container here of some ice, and this, I'm going to go ahead and fill it with water in just a minute, but I wanted this to come to a boil before I put this in. So the process we're going to be doing today is we'll take our tomatoes, and we'll take some type of a ladle or something that you've got that you can put the tomatoes in. That way you don't get burned, and drop them down into the boiling water. They only need to sit in there, depending on if they've got a good roll and boil to your water, maybe 30 seconds to a minute, maybe sometimes 2. But you can definitely tell when they are ready to come out, because the skin on them will split. And then when you see the skin split on them, you know that they're done, and to take those out. So if you put a whole lot in there, of course that'll bring the temperature of the water down. Then we will dump them into this cold ice bath, and we'll let them sit in there for just a little while. We don't want to let them sit in there for too long, because then they'll get waterlogged. So as this process is going, you can do a few, put them in your boiling water, let the skin split, put them into your ice bath, let them cool down a little bit, put another batch in, and while those are doing, working on the split, then you can take those and we can start cutting them and getting them ready for our canning process. So we'll continue to let this heat up to a boil, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. All right, we are ready to move on now. My water has come up to a nice little boil there, so we'll take one of our tomatoes, and I've just given these a little bit of a wash in the sink. So we're just going to drop one in. All right, so I can see that the skin on the tomato has split now. So let me see if I can get that turned around here so that you can see it. All right, so let me turn this over so you can see what I'm talking about here. So you can see where the skin on that has split right there on the side. So now we're going to take that and we're going to throw that into our cold water bath. And then we can get another tomato ready to go, and that goes into our boiling water. Now that I've got a couple of these in my cold water bath, I want to take them out now because I don't want to let them sit in there too long. They'll get waterlogged. And then as you can see here from this split, you can just peel the skin right off of it. It just comes right off. So we're not going to throw these away. I'm going to save these for something else, for another video, and we'll show you how to make tomato powder. So you can see how easy that skin come off of there. It comes off there really easily. So we're going to take our knife and run it around here and core out the center part of it, take the stem out. And that just pops out just like that. And if you see any of these little white marks around the top here, or green marks, you want to cut those out. I don't like those in my tomatoes, so definitely take those off, and we'll leave those for the compost pile. I'm going to go ahead and start chopping these up, and I'm going to be making crushed tomatoes today, which I'll cut mine into a lot smaller pieces. But if you're going to be making diced tomatoes, you don't have to cut them up as small, just like you would normally see in a can of diced tomatoes that you would buy at the store. If you see any of these little dark seeds in there, I try to take those out of there. I don't put those into my jar of tomatoes. There is nothing like a canned tomato from tomatoes that you get out of your garden or from your local farmer's market. So that's what we got today. Those are just kind of a rough chop on those that we've got. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer those over to my Dutch oven. So definitely when you're working with tomatoes, they are a little bit acidic. And we're going to be adding a little bit more ingredients to our tomatoes. We'll be putting some lemon juice in it, which will make them a little bit more acidic. You definitely want to use something that's either a stainless steel pan, or like I've got here, a Dutch oven that has a ceramic lining in it. If you use aluminum, sometimes it has a chance to leave a little bit of an aluminum taste on your food, and we definitely don't want that. So if you've got a stainless steel pot or a Dutch oven, definitely use that for your tomatoes. I'm going to continue to work on these and pull all the skins off these and get these all cut up, and just wanted to show you again how easy that was for that skin to come off there. And once I get these done, I'll be back to show you what we've got. All right, I am down to my last tomato, and we are almost done here with that. Again, just show you what that looks like with those skins coming off, that it's so easy to get those peeled. It saves you time and time and time. Instead of having to sit there and peel all of them, they just come right off. So definitely use that little trick when you're making your tomatoes for canning. All right, we've got the last one cut up now, so let's put that into our pot. And I've got quite a bit of juice here on my workspace. We definitely want to save that, so I'm going to grab a bench scraper and I'm going to put that into my pot and save that too. All right, we've got our tomatoes done now. We've got our skins here to the side. I'm going to save these. I'll show you these in another video, what I'm going to do with those. So I'm going to set those aside. I'm going to go ahead and clean up my workspace here so we can get ready to start cooking our tomatoes, and I'll be right back. All right, so now we've got our tomatoes in our pot and we're ready to go. So I've got my burner turned on here and I've got it on high. We're going to bring these up to a boil, and I'm going to be making crushed tomatoes today. So I've got this little tool here that we're going to be using, and you just kind of go down there with it. The reason I like this is because it is a nylon tool and it doesn't scratch up anything if you want to use it in your Teflon pans or your nonstick pans and things versus the metal one. So this just kind of breaks things up a little bit, and I'll put a link in the description box below if you like it. It's got multiple uses for it. I think the main tool used for it is to chop up meat. So like if you had hamburger meat and something, you could put that in your pot and get it mixed around. But I like it for doing this also instead of using the metal one, because I don't want to scrape my bowl up here. So we're just going to kind of break these up a little bit more, bring these to a boil, and we're going to boil them for 5 minutes. And then I will be back and let you see what that looks like. All right, now my tomatoes have come up to a boil, and you can see here what that looks like. I'm going to turn these down to medium. And I'm going to let these cook like this for 5 minutes. So we'll bring them up to a boil, let them cook for 5 minutes on medium, and then they'll be ready to put into our jars. Don't forget to keep stirring on these. You definitely don't want this to stick to the bottom of your pan here, and then you can scrape that goodness off the side of it and back down into it too. So just keep a watch on these. It's 5 minutes of cooking and a little bit of stirring, and it will be well worth it in the end. All right, our tomatoes are done. I've got those turned off now. I'm going to go over here and grab my jars, and we will start loading these up into our jars. So I'll be right back in just a minute. All right, so you can see here I've got one of my jars out. I'm just going to sit here on this little mat, and I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of them. I'm going to turn it over just a little bit so I can drain some of that water out of it. I'm just going to take a couple of them out, and that way they'll stay hot, and then we'll go ahead and start loading up our jars. So I'll be right back in just a minute. All right, I've got my jars out now. I've got everything here ready to go. All of my utensils are clean and ready to start loading up our jars. I'm going to be using pint jars today instead of quarts. I know when we were kids and my mom was teaching us, my sister and I, how to put up tomatoes and things, she always used the quart jars because she made a lot of ingredients and things. But most of the recipes that I use call for the little 14.5-ounce cans of the crushed or the diced tomatoes. So that's about what the equivalent is to one of these little pint jars here. So I'm going to be using these today, but if you definitely want to use the quart ones, you definitely can, and use those. So let's go ahead and get our tomatoes into our jar. So I've got one of these funnels here. If you haven't seen my video on what these are, definitely check that out. I go through a lot of the canning techniques and things on what to do with your canning supplies. So this one has little markings on it. It says 1/4, 1/2, and 3/4 inch. This is talking about the headspace that's needed between where the top of the food comes in the jar to where the top of the jar frame is itself. So with the tomatoes, we want a 1/2 inch headspace on those. So that's what we'll be shooting for today. So we've got that there. If you've got one of these little funnels like this, you can definitely use one of those. And then this is a debubbler. I go over what this is. It has little markings here on the side. This same thing, 1/4, 1/2, 3/4 inch. And you can use that by putting it on the side of the jar and measuring what you've got for your 1/2 inch of your headspace on that. Even though our tomatoes are an acidic food, we're definitely going to put some more in it for our canning. So I've got some real lemon juice here. You definitely want to use the bottled lemon juice over the fresh, because this has been stabilized to a certain percentage of acidity in the liquid here. So you definitely want that, because you want everything to be as consistent as you can. So some of the citrus that you might put in there, lemon, might not have as much acidity to it as another one. So this is concentrated the way that it is. It's all stabilized, so you get a good measurement of your acidity on that. If you want to use citric acid, I know when we were growing up, that's what we used to use, was citric acid. I couldn't find the citric acid. So if you've got citric acid, it's a little powder, and it comes in a little container. You can definitely use that. That would be 1/4 of a teaspoon of the citric acid per jar. So I couldn't find it. I'm going to be using the lemon juice today, and per jar we want 1 tablespoon of the lemon juice. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there now. All right, I've got my lemon juice in. I can go ahead and start putting in my tomatoes. I really like this ladle here that I've got. It's really deep, but if you don't have one of these, you can definitely use anything that you've got. Just make sure, as we were talking about earlier, that if it's something that's going to be touching the food of the tomatoes because of the acidity in them, you definitely want something that's stainless steel and not aluminum or something, or you can use plastic or whatever you've got. So definitely, I'll put the link in the description box below what this is. So I'm going to be filling these jars up so I get a 1/2 inch headspace at the top. Now that you've got your tomatoes in your jar and you've got them up to the level of where the 1/2 inch headspace it is, you want to take your debubbler and you want to run it around down in the jar just to make sure there's not any air pockets in it, because what you think you might have your level up here to a 1/2 inch from the top of the jar. And when you process your food, if you don't do this step and make sure there's no bubbles in it, you could get a false reading. And then after you process your food, you might see that you've got more than the 1/2 inch that you wanted. This is probably about 1 inch from the top of this. So definitely you want to debubble your food after you put it into the jars. And after you get through checking and make sure there's no air pockets in it, then you'll move on to your next step. All right, I've got a 1/2 inch headspace. I use my little tool there to measure that. So that comes up just about to above the bottom lip there of that jar. So the first big ring on the very bottom is just a little bit above that for your 1/2 inch. So now at this point, we're going to put some salt in it. This is completely optional. We always did that when I was growing up. We always seasoned the tomatoes, but if you definitely want to do that later, that is something that you can add while you're cooking. That way you can control what's going on. But if you know how much salt you put in your tomatoes when you make them, then you definitely know when you're making your recipes if you need to add any more or not. So if you don't want to put any in, you don't have to, but I'm going to be putting in a 1/2 teaspoon of salt on top of my tomatoes here. And remember, with anything that you're using in canning and preserving foods and things, the only ingredient that needs to be on the box is salt. A lot of the boxes of salt you might pick up have other ingredients in it. They might have an anti-caking agent and iodine and things in it. You definitely don't want to put that into your canned goods, as it could interfere with the canning. It could make the tomatoes a little cloudy. So definitely the only ingredient that you want in your salt is salt. So whatever you use, definitely make sure that it only has the ingredient salt in it. So I'm going to put a 1/2 teaspoon of salt on the top of my tomatoes here. And now I've got a little bit of white vinegar, and I've got just a little paper towel here, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to run it around the top of the lid. And this is one last check to make sure that there's no chips or anything on the top, and that gives that a nice clean, in case there's any liquid from your tomatoes, any of the salt might have got on it. You definitely want your lid to get a good seal on it. All right, now let's move on to our lids. I've got my lids here in this water, and like I say, we definitely do not want to be boiling our lids because it could do some damage to that ring on the bottom of that. So I just brought these at just a little bit above room temperature. So we're going to put that on my nice clean jar right in the center. And we're going to take our good band here and we're going to put these on until it just becomes not moving anymore. And then we want to make it fingertip tight. And the reason we want to do that is when we process the jars, any of the air in it will be able to escape outside the lid before it seals. And that way we get a nice, good seal and keep all the oxygen out of it. And our food will stay good and shelf stable. So when you put your rings on, just put them on just fingertip tight. You don't want to grind it down on it. You want them just fingertip tight. And we will go ahead and move these to the canner for ready to go. I'm going to continue to work on these and see how many we get. All right, I'm cleaning up my last jar here. Make sure that is nice and clean. I've got my salt in it, and I'm ready for my lid. Let's go ahead and put that on. And our ring. Fingertip tight on that. All right, so I got 5 jars here. I've got just a little bit left over. I don't think I'm going to have enough for a whole jar just from how I was scooping it around. So I'm going to save this, and I will cook this in something in a recipe in the next day or two, but I will put it in the refrigerator because there's not enough here to go into one of these jars. All right, our jars are ready to go into our water bath counter now, and we're going to put them on high. I want to bring these to a rolling boil. And once these come to a rolling boil, then I will start the timer, and I'm going to water bath can these for 35 minutes. If you are canning quarts, you will set your timer for 45 minutes. So these are pints, 35, quarts are 45, and I'm gonna go ahead and load the canner down now. All right, I've got my jars and my water bath canner. I'm gonna wait till that comes to a rapid boil. We want that to be rapid boiling, and then I will set my timer again for 35 minutes for pints, 45 minutes for quarts, and I will see you back when they're done. I did want to show you how much of the tomato I had left. I had just a little bit left of it. It was just scant short, maybe half an inch where it needed to be. So I've got one of these storage lids. I'm just going to let this cool down here on the counter. When it gets cooled down, I'll put it in the refrigerator, and I'll use it in something here tomorrow or the next day. This will stay good in the refrigerator for a couple of days, and then we'll definitely be using it in something. So let it sit here, cool down on the counter. I'm gonna clean this mess up, and I'll see you back in 35. I am back, and my tomatoes have finished processing. They did boil for 35 minutes, and then I did turn the burner off, took the lid off the pot, and let them sit for 5 minutes before I took them out. So when you pick them up, just definitely pick them straight up. Don't be tilting them and stuff like that. If there's any moisture on the top of it, with the heat from that, it will evaporate fairly quickly. So now we're going to sit and wait for 24 hours to make sure that our tomatoes have sealed. And with that, you can take the band off of them and see if the actual lid itself is stuck down. And if it is, then you know you've got a good seal and a good canning on your tomatoes. And you want to store your tomatoes on the shelf with the bands off. That way, if you do, by chance, it could happen, one of the lids could dislodge, and if you had the band on it, if it was all sticky, it could stick back down to the jar after it has been exposed to air, and it could let bacteria and any other things in there that you might not want in your food that could spoil it. So definitely when you store your canned goods of tomatoes, store them on the can shelf with the bands off. So now we're just going to wait and listen for the pings, if there's any left of those to ping. I did hear a couple of them when I pulled them right out of the canister that went off, and that is that little, there's inside of the actual lid there, there's a little dimple that's on the top of it, and when that depresses down, you can tell you've got a good seal on your tomatoes. If you find out after you've 24 hours, you've taken the band off, that one of the seals did not take, then definitely you can still use that. Just take it, put it in the refrigerator, and use it immediately. That way you put the other ones away. But don't think I can ever count where one that I ever made didn't seal, but it could happen. It could happen. So definitely check those after 24 hours and do that. So just to kind of recap what we did, we cut up our tomatoes and we cooked them for 5 minutes on about a medium heat. Once they'd come up to a boil, then we turned the heat down to medium heat, cooked them for 5 minutes, and then we were able to put them into our jars. Now with the acidity of the tomatoes, we need to add it a little bit more acidity to it, so we added the lemon juice, and with the pint jars we had 1 tablespoon, and if you do quarts, then you double that for that amount. If you have citric acid, you can definitely use that. I'll put that in the description box for the recipe. What that is a 1/4 teaspoon of that. And then if you want to put salt in it, that is completely up to you. You can wait till you get ready to eat them. Preparing your dishes, you can put it in, but I did season all of these with a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. And I hope you've enjoyed this content. And if you've learned a little bit, I pass on what I know about canning. And like I said earlier, the USDA is a good source for a lot of information on that. And because the canning process, I am at 1,000 feet where I am now. Water boils at different temperatures, and you need to add a little bit more time if you're at a higher altitude. So I'll put the link in the description box for currently what that is. So definitely when you get ready to make these, if you're making them way into the future, definitely check to see what the current times are. And it'll put in there, when I put that in the description box, how much time you need to add to what I stated. So if you've never canned before, I hope you've taken some of this information and go out and get you some canning equipment and put those tomatoes up. I know you're going to love it. This is probably one of the easiest things you can possibly make in canning. I know this was probably one of the first things that my mom and my uncle taught myself and my sister how to can when we were growing up. So it's fairly easy to do that. So definitely give it a try. And if you've canned in the past, maybe you might consider, if you've not done it in several years, get them out and put some tomatoes away. They're always better when you get them out of the garden than you can get them out of the store. You always get asked, well, isn't it just cheaper just to get them in the can? There's just nothing like homegrown and home canned the way that it is. You control what's in it. You know what's in it because you made them. And I just like it a lot better. So I hope you like this content. And if you do, maybe you might consider giving me a thumbs up. I would really appreciate it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And maybe check out one of these other 2 videos over here. You might find something else you like. Bye-bye now.